There's a detail about some of the longest-lived people on Earth that almost never makes it into the articles about them. It isn't a supplement, it isn't a superfood. It's the order they eat their food in. And I didn't understand why that would matter until I looked into it myself. I'm Frank. I'm 83. I read about places like this the way some men read about baseball stats, obsessively, looking for the thing everyone else missed. And what I found changed how I sit down to dinner every single night. But let me back up first, because you need to know why I went looking in the first place. For years, my morning number sat exactly where I didn't want it. High, stubborn, unmoved by whatever I tried the night before. I did the things I was told, cut the bread, portioned the rice, took my medication on schedule without fail. And still, morning after morning, that little machine gave me a number that made me feel like none of it counted. I'm 83, and most days now I spend the morning in my garden, walk into town for my own groceries, and sit with friends over a long lunch without once thinking about the meter in my kitchen drawer. That wasn't always the case. There was a stretch of years where the first thought in my head every single morning was dread before I'd even opened my eyes all the way. Here's the frustration I want to name directly, because I lived inside it for a long time. Doing everything right and having your body act like you did nothing at all. It's a particular kind of loneliness. You start to wonder if your body has simply decided to stop listening to you, like you're shouting instructions down a hallway and nobody's home to receive them anymore. I remember a specific morning. I'd had the smallest dinner of my week, practically nothing by my own standards, and the number was still elevated. I sat at my kitchen table and just felt tired. Not physically tired, tired of trying. My late wife used to watch me do this, sit at that table, staring at a number, doing arithmetic that never balanced. And she'd tell me I was being too hard on myself. I didn't believe her at the time. I thought discipline was supposed to be enough, that if I just tightened the reins a little more, ate a little less, walked a little farther, the number would eventually surrender. It never did, not from sheer force of will alone. And after she passed, those mornings got harder in a different way. Nobody left to tell me I was being too hard on myself, just the machine and the silence of an empty kitchen. I think that's part of why I went looking for answers as hard as I did. It wasn't only about the number anymore. It was about proving to myself that I still had some say over what happened to my own body, even alone, even at this age. That's when I started digging into research on populations where diabetes and high morning glucose are far less common than they are here, even among people who live well into their 90s and beyond. And what kept surfacing again and again wasn't a secret ingredient. It was two things: the order food is eaten in, and a small, fermented side dish present at nearly every meal. Before I explain those two things, I need to explain what your morning number is actually responding to, because almost nobody explains this part clearly. Research on aging and metabolism describes something called the dawn phenomenon. Between roughly 2 and 4 in the morning, your liver releases stored glucose into your bloodstream. It's a completely normal process meant to give your body fuel to wake up on. In a younger or more insulin-sensitive body, that release gets absorbed quietly. But after 60, especially with years of built-up insulin resistance, that release isn't cleared as efficiently, and it shows up on your meter as a number that looks like a failure of last night's dinner, when it's really a leftover of something your liver did on its own, hours before you woke up. Here's the connection that surprised me most. What you eat and how you eat it in the evening determines how much ammunition is left over for that overnight process to work with. A dinner that spikes your blood sugar sharply leaves more circulating sugar and triggers a bigger, more prolonged insulin response, and that whole cascade interacts with what your liver does later that night. The goal isn't just eating less, it's flattening the curve of that evening spike in the first place. And there's a particular detail about the way certain long-lived populations structure that evening meal, something about the sequence of what goes in your mouth first that changes that curve more than almost anything else I found. And I promise I'll walk you through exactly what it is. You do everything right. You eat clean, you take your pills, and the next morning that number is still too high. I know that frustration. I lived it for years. They never tell you about the morning rise. Your sugar climbing while you sleep, no matter what you did the day before. You wake up, you test, and it feels like the work didn't count. like you're stuck depending on more and more and getting nowhere. I was done feeling powerless. I didn't want to throw out my doctor's plan. I wanted something natural and simple I could add to it, something that finally moved that morning number. I'll walk you through what changed it for me. And the natural support I add every day is in the free presentation linked below. The first piece is meal order, the sequence of what you eat, not just what's on the plate. Research on eating sequence and blood sugar response has found that eating vegetables and protein before you eat your starches and carbohydrates, rather than mixing everything together or eating rice first, measurably flattens the blood sugar spike after the meal. The theory behind it involves how quickly carbohydrates break down into glucose versus how fiber and proteins slow that process down when they hit your stomach first. Simple as it sounds, something as small as eating your vegetables and your fish before your rice, instead of alternating bites of everything at once, changes the shape of your after-dinner glucose curve. The second piece is fermented food, something present at nearly every meal in these longer-lived villages, usually a small side of fermented vegetables or fermented soy. Research on fermented foods and metabolic health has found associations between regular fermented food intake and improved insulin sensitivity, likely connected to the beneficial bacteria these foods introduce and how those bacteria influence digestion and inflammation. It's not a miracle food. It's a small, consistent habit, present at almost every single meal, day after day, for decades. I started small. I began eating my vegetables and the protein on my plate first, deliberately, before touching anything starchy. And I added a small forkful of naturally fermented vegetables to dinner. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, something I make myself in a jar on my counter. I felt almost silly doing it at first. It seemed too small to matter, but I want to be honest with you the way I wish someone had been honest with me. Neither of these things works alone as a single fix. They work as part of a small evening system, and here's the rest of what I added around them. The third piece is movement, a short walk after dinner, 10 to 15 minutes, nothing strenuous. Your muscles pull glucose directly out of your bloodstream through a pathway called GLUT4 that doesn't require insulin to function. That means even a body with sluggish insulin response can still clear some of that after-dinner sugar through simple movement, leaving less material for the liver's overnight release to pile onto. The fourth piece is something almost nobody connects to blood sugar at all: the timing of your last bite. Research on meal timing has associated eating dinner earlier in the evening with a longer gap before sleep with better next morning glucose readings than eating a large meal right before bed. I moved my dinner up by about an hour, simply giving my body more daylight hours to process what I'd eaten before the overnight liver process even began. Meal order first, a small fermented side, a short walk after, an earlier dinner. 4 small, almost boring habits borrowed loosely from villages where high morning numbers simply aren't the norm most people my age live with here. I want to be honest about how slow this felt at first, because I don't want to oversell it to you. The first week I didn't notice much of anything, and I nearly went back to eating however I pleased, telling myself the whole idea was another dead end. What kept me going was something my late wife used to say about gardening, actually, that nothing worth growing shows itself in the first week, and if you dig it up to check the roots too early, you kill it before it had a chance. So I left it alone. I kept the order of my plate the same, kept the small jar of fermented vegetables on the counter, kept the earlier dinner and the short walk night after night without checking too closely for results. It was closer to 3 weeks before I noticed the number sitting a little lower more mornings than not. Not dramatic, not overnight, but real and consistent in a way nothing else I'd tried had been. I want you to picture what an ordinary Tuesday looks like for me now. I walk to the market myself, no cart, just a basket over my arm. I cook my own dinner, slowly, without rushing, because I actually enjoy the process now instead of dreading the number that follows it. Some evenings I sit on my porch afterward with a cup of tea and just watch the street, no meter in my hand, no dread sitting in my chest. That's not luck. That's an 83-year-old man who stopped treating dinner like a countdown to punishment. There's a woman named Norma from my old bowling league who told me she'd been diabetic for over 20 years and had essentially made peace with her number never moving again. When I mentioned the meal order idea to her, just the order, nothing else at first, she was skeptical, The way I was skeptical of the first thing anyone ever tells me is simple. But she tried it for 3 weeks because, as she put it cost me nothing to try. She told me later it was the first change in years that felt like it was actually connecting to something, rather than one more thing she was doing that made no visible difference. I think about what separates people our age who've given up on their number ever moving again from the ones who haven't. It's rarely about trying harder at the same things. It's usually about someone finally explaining the part that was missing, that the body isn't broken, it's just been asked to do the same losing fight every single night without any support. I think back on Norma's face when she told me about her results, this small, satisfied surprise, like she hadn't let herself hope for it. She said her daughter, who lives 2 states away, had started calling more just to hear how she was doing, and Norma joked that maybe the number wasn't the only thing that had quietly gotten better. I believe that. I think when you stop being ruled by fear every morning, you have a little more of yourself left over for the people who love you. There's a deeper fear underneath all of this that I don't think gets said out loud enough. It isn't really about the number. It's about independence. About whether you'll still be the one driving yourself to the store, cooking your own dinner, living in your own home, or whether this disease slowly takes those things away one by one. That fear is real, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't. But I've also learned, at 83, that the body still listens, even now, when you give it the right signals instead of fighting it head-on every night. I'm not telling you to change anything your doctor has prescribed. Please don't. Not without talking to them first. What I am telling you is that there are habits, borrowed from people who live decades without the morning number problem so many of us carry, that work alongside your treatment, never instead of it. If you watched this whole thing, you're not the type who gives up. You're the type who keeps looking for a real answer. So let me be straight with you. The morning number isn't your fault, and it isn't just diabetes. It's the dawn rise, and it responds to the right daily habits. The goal was never to quit your treatment. It was to support it naturally so you finally see that number move and feel in control again. Alongside the steps I showed you, I take a simple, natural support every day to help keep my blood sugar in a healthy range. Affordable, easy, and it works with my doctor's plan, not against it. The free presentation is in the description below. Go see it for yourself. And keep your doctor in the loop. This is support, not a replacement. If nobody ever explained the order of eating idea to you before today, I understand feeling a mix of relief and frustration. Relief that there's something new to try, frustration that it took this long to hear it. Both feelings are fair, and I felt them too. Drop your morning number in the comments below. I read every one, and I promise you there are people your age sitting with the same frustration, wondering if their body will ever cooperate again. Please talk with your doctor before changing your routine, always alongside your care, never instead of it. And if this changed how you think about your own dinner plate tonight, subscribe. There's more of what I've learned, and I'd like you to have it.